On the table by the window lies a bundle of letters tied with a darkened ribbon. The seal has blurred on the wax, rubbing the smell of smoke and sheep's wool into the paper. A goose feather sticks out of a cup of sand. On the shelf is a box with copies. Under the bench is a bag of small coins, barely enough for the messenger's journey. In the corner, boots are drying after a dirty country road, where each wheel creaks as if counting the miles. The house breathes with the warm steam of cooking and the cold anxiety of accounts. The dowry must be delivered intact. The receipt must be drawn up in words, and honor must be maintained where it is accepted not in poetry, but in the shop. Dear viewers, welcome. Write to us about where you are watching this episode from and what family honor means to you. A loud word in the square or a guarantee of quiet payments. Leave a comment if you have encountered how rumors change the price of credit. Make yourself comfortable and enjoy listening. This story sounds muffled, like footsteps on warm flooring. Letters from a 15th century English family show intimacy not as a picture, but as family accounting. Grown-ups write to each other about what keeps the house running. Grain and candles, horses and boundary ditches, cartage fees and the price of sealing wax. In each letter, the personal is hidden between the lines of income and expenditure. Tenderness lives in trust, and shamelessness, if you look for it, is found not in the body, but in the attempt to shift someone else's risk onto someone else's wax seal. Marriage here is not a showcase, but a package of agreements. The dowry is laid out in words. So many head of cattle, so many measures of cloth, so many dishes, the right to a share of the harvest in the absence of a husband, the obligation of relatives to come as witnesses if a dispute arises in the parish. Each item requires witnesses, dates written out in full, and copies in a chest. An adult woman enters into a union not only with her heart, but also with a list. An adult man accepts the union not only with affection, but also with guarantors, without whom the shop will not sell salt and iron. And already in this dryness, the first tension can be heard. The road is long, illness is close, and any breakdown is not only tears, but also a penalty surcharge for unpredictability. Everyday life is ruthless and precise. In winter, the pen freezes in your fingers, and sand helps the line not to float. In spring, showers wash away the boundary ditches, which means you have to pay the surveyor. In summer, the messenger goes at night so as not to delay the receipt. In autumn, horses get stuck on the way to the fair, and the shop rewrites the payment deadline. Bed in these letters is not a decoration, but part of the work calendar. Days of abstinence, postpartum rest, illnesses that require a redistribution of responsibilities, not for the sake of morality, but for the sake of the rhythm of work, so as not to disrupt the harvest and incur a church fine. Intimacy is measured by the speed of recovery and the stability of the schedule, and in this measurement, respect looks like a pre-written clause rather than inspiration. Honor appears as an accounting unit, not as a gilded coat of arms. If a house is known for its punctuality, the shop charges a risk premium. The carrier agrees to an installment plan, and the neighbor fearlessly becomes a guarantor. If, on the other hand, you once disrupt a delivery or remain silent about a shortage, the entire price list of the world changes against you. Letters teach this sobriety. Elders collect witness notes. Adult women bring up previous inventories. Compare the lengths of fabric cuts with expenditure lines. Check that each measure of a barrel is named with words without ambiguity. Here, they do not believe in loud tones. Here, they believe in coincidences. Rumor is the most insidious item of loss. It does not slam the door, it steals trust. It is enough for a rumor of disorder to spread at the fair, and the shop lays down a hidden percentage. The carrier demands an advance payment, and the neighboring line postpones the conversation about marriage. The answer in the letters is always the same: paper mobilization. Rumor mongers are countered by 3 quiet moves: requests to relatives for previous conscientious settlements, copies of contracts to the parish clergy, and a quick mailing to creditors of updated terms with new guarantors. There is no poetry in this, but there is effect. Rumors settle like dust if they have nothing to stick to. Meanwhile, the city lives by its own politics. Fees change, case queues are reshuffled, and every change weighs on families like dampness on walls. It is not the power of the voice that saves, but the weight of the papers. When copies are kept in 2 places, when witnesses come from different lines, when the measurer has signed the volumes of barrels and the length of cuts in advance, the wind of power no longer blows away the supports. This is where a prepared turn is born, the first of those that will change the outcome. The word custom, convenient on a peaceful day, turns into emptiness in conflict. The letters show how a house that relied on "that's how we do things here" begins to sink until it replaces custom with contract. This gesture marks the beginning of adult stability. In this picture, the bed is again moved away from the window. It is not a subject of gossip, but part of a schedule of work and economy of effort. Even the expression marital duty loses its rhetorical brilliance and takes on the weight of everyday life. The mutual distribution of time, so as not to disrupt field work, so that the woman is not left unprotected during illness, so that the man's delivery schedule is not disrupted. The letters do not discuss details, but the very fact that intimacy is taken into account shows a sober view. What could easily be turned into a cheap plot is kept here as a resource that cannot be traded in the marketplace. The documents tie the house together. In the chest lie inventories of dowries, debt receipts, cover letters to intermediaries, and short notes about witnesses. The keys are heavy, the paper brittle, the sealing wax fragile. But it is precisely this fragility that overcomes the noise. When a dispute arises over inheritance or property boundaries, when the neighboring line tries to strike with a hint, this knot will be opened on the chancellor's table. Numbers in words, measures without ambiguity, names linked to the parish register. Thus, intimacy, drawn into accounting, preserves the home better than any song. By the end of the first knot, it becomes clear. The romance and the truth did exist, but they lived in different rooms. In letters, tenderness is predictability. Care is a copy in a spare chest. Honor is a coincidence of deadlines and promises. A house where adults know how to write numbers in words and keep ribbons of seals gets through winter easier than a house with beautiful words and empty copies. Next comes the second tension, an encounter with how honor is woven into debt receipts and why a single whisper can change the price of the road. But first, it is worth remembering the smell of this room: wax, wool, the steam of cooking, and sand on a fresh line. This is the real voice of love when it becomes the long work of survival. The second knot unfolds where honor ceases to be a word on the marriage bench and becomes an asset with a price and an expiration date. As soon as the dispute leaves the kitchen and enters the shopyard, the family reputation turns into a risk factor. The shopkeeper, a grown man with his own accounting, does not read hearts. He reads coincidences. How many times the house met the deadlines? How many times his witnesses confirmed what was said with deeds? How many times the dowry arrived in the declared amount? Any crack instantly goes into the price list. If last season the house missed a fabric delivery, today it will pay more for salt. If the neighbors whisper that the widow's share has been delayed, the driver will add to the transportation cost. Honor becomes the percentage that the house pays for the opportunity to live, and the letters show how they try to lower this interest rate, not with rhetoric, but with paper geometry. Adult women of the clan are the quiet operators of this geometry. Their work is visible in the details. Neatly rewritten numbers in words, copies prepared in advance, lists of witnesses from different lines so as not to depend on the mood of one person. When there is a danger of rumors, they are the first to pick up the house book for previous years. Compare the amounts issued by receipts with grain receipts, check the lengths of fabric cuts with the dowry expenditure, and pick up the labels where the scribe has noted the shade and quality by hand. These little things are not for beauty. Each one can become evidence that cannot be refuted by shouting in the street. And at the moment, when a dispute with neighbors or creditors begins to smell like a public square, it is these little things that become bridges over the quagmire. The city adds its own logic to this arithmetic. The fair is not only a market, but also an amplifier of hearing. Pamphlets, crudely printed and poorly aligned, run faster than a messenger and feed on the inadequacies of speech. Letters respond to this with symmetrical speed. While the leaflet is circulating among the stalls, the house posts a short, dry extract with a seal confirming the agreement on the door of the parish, and immediately takes copies of it to the office and the guild hall. The announcement has a date in words and real wax, while the leaflet has only type and malice. The guild clerk, a grown man accustomed to considering fate a commodity, believes the seal and the lines more than gossip. The driver, accustomed to being responsible for the wheels, believes the receipt more than the clamor. Thus, the document moves the conversation from the theater to the accounting office. In the same vein, the first prepared turn appears. Custom, comfortable as a soft pillow, cannot withstand the heavy weight of the dispute. The family, accustomed to referring to "that's how we do it," suddenly discovers that the shop, the driver, and the chancellor know a different order, the written one. Without agreement on measures and deadlines, honor slips like a poorly dried line, and every movement leaves stains. Letters record the moment of sobriety. Abolish the reference to vague custom. Replace it with a clear clause with a date and witnesses. From that moment on, the risk decreases, because the court no longer needs to guess what the parties meant. It is enough to verify the words. And where yesterday confusion created space for pressure, today there remains a corridor through which only consistency can pass. The second shift, painful but salutary, is related to the transparency of costs. Correspondence acknowledges what is usually hidden. The road costs this much, the courier's lodging costs that much, the delay due to rain costs this much. This is not an attempt to elicit sympathy, but rather to level the balance of trust. The bench and the driver see in these lines not pity, but responsibility. A house that knows how to express its weaknesses in numbers and words inspires more faith than a house with heroic gestures and empty lines. And it is precisely this anti-poetic realism that reduces the cost of credit, because unpredictability is tied down like a barrel with hoops. The paradox is that the drier the letter becomes, the more firmly it holds on to what others are eager to turn into a spectacle. Meanwhile, intimacy, sought after by prying eyes, turns out to be built into the routine of work and protection. Days of abstinence and periods of illness are not described, but taken into account. Who takes on responsibilities? What share of the dowry is temporarily transferred to a trusted relative? How long the installment plan is extended so as not to disrupt the payment schedule? This is the language of reciprocity, not the law of the strong. It does not discuss the body. It distributes the load so that none of the adults are left without a tool and without a face in court. The letters thus overturn the familiar myth. Vulgarity does not lie in bed, but in the attempt to keep people in check, and it is precisely a document devoid of glamour that knocks this lever out of their hands. An inheritance dispute looms on the horizon, dry as a boundary stone and just as sharp. The neighboring line tries to turn the city's pricing against the house. Through hints in leaflets and conversations at the gate, the price of credit is pushed up, transportation is pushed toward an advance payment, and the future marriage of a relative is pushed into the realm of doubt. The response is a paper counterattack with facts, a list of wedding utensils, confirmed by former witnesses, an inventory where each cup and each piece of fabric is matched with a receipt line, a clause about the widow's share, which specifies who exactly and when handed over the keys to the chest. Such a set of documents is enough for the court to stop the price increase based on rumors. The market sees that the risk is manageable and returns to the previous figures. In this slippery place, a third prepared shift can be heard. Honor, laid down on paper, is cheaper than honor played out in the square. Then comes the tedious but salvific part. Memory training is replaced by procedure training. In the house, they learn to write not once and for all, but correctly every time. Numbers, in words, measures, without ambiguity, names of witnesses, with an indication of the parish, dates, in relation to the agricultural cycle. Copies are kept in 2 places, and the keys to the chests are distributed among adults from different lines so that a dispute does not end because of one closed door. Not 1, but 2 witnesses from different circles are taken to the city so that their words are not dependent on a single interest. All this looks like bureaucratic padding, but in reality, it is armor against tired memory and against those who like to pick locks with someone else's voice. The ending of this part is quiet. In the evening, the bundles of papers return to the chests. The sand is shaken off the dried lines, and the seal cools down. The house is still poor in poetry and rich in copies, but this wealth is the only thing that allows adults to survive another wave of fairground noise. Intimacy remains where it cannot be bought for a shout. Honor remains where it is accepted as payment without unnecessary questions. Dowry remains where each item is named as it should be. A new round lies ahead. The court will reach a compromise not because someone turned out to be more beautiful, but because the paper has formed a consistent picture. And by this day, the house is ready. The prepared turns have been made, the bridges have been laid, the risk has been condensed into lines that stretch through the winter without a single loud word. On the 3rd morning after the fair, the house greets the day as if the night had only tightened the knots on the paper ribbons. Fresh copies are laid out on the table, the signatures of witnesses are checked, and the costs of the road are recounted in words so that no number slips through the ink. Here, any trifle can become the focus of a dispute. A jug involved in calculations must have a measure, and the measure must be recognized by the guild. The fabric promised in the dowry must be described not by color in words, but by shade and length, marked by the scribe's hand. Adult women hold the keys to the chests and keep a register, where next to each item there is not only its origin, but also its route, from whose warehouse, with which carrier, on which day of the journey. Such dryness seems unnecessary until a wave of neighbors rises. Leaflets with hints have already been distributed to the shops, and they are not striking in honor, but for liquidity. Carriers are raising their fees, shops are asking for prepayment, and intermediaries are postponing meetings. The response is not a cry, but an accelerated publication of facts. A short extract from the recognized contract is entered into the parish register, and copies are sent to the office and the guild hall. The extract has a date in words and real wax, while the leaflets have only anger. With this sharp contrast, the city once again distinguishes between metal and gilding. At the same time, the line between illness and labor, on which the ability to keep one's word depends, is stretched. The scribe complains of poor eyesight. Another begins to write, his hand less beautiful, but more obedient to the rules. The manager has a cold. Some of his powers are temporarily transferred to a trusted relative, and this is confirmed by a short clause so that no expenditure is spontaneous. The mistress is recovering after a hard winter. This means that control of part of the reserves is being returned to her, and the shop must see this in the line. Otherwise, any movement of grain will become questionable. In this prosaic geography, the bed remains part of the routine. It is not a subject of dispute or a picture for the square, but a circumstance that affects the distribution of responsibilities. When this is reflected in the work schedule, the rumor dies down. There is nothing to grab except what has already been accounted for. Meanwhile, the dispute over the inheritance, which the neighboring line tried to fuel with rumors, enters a phase where documents replace emotions. 3 bundles land on the chancellor's desk. The first contains a list of the dowry with labels indicating the lengths of the pieces, their shades, and their purpose. The second contains receipts from previous years, showing that the house was completed on time, and witnesses, adults from different lines, confirmed each transfer. The third contains a letter from the measurer with measurements tied to the guild standard. Looking at this cold landscape, the court ceases to hear the square. It begins to hear the sequence. The neighboring side, unfolding the sheets, brings a different music. Assumptions, understatements. That's how it's done. But any note not secured with a seal and date falls off the edge of the table like sand from a dry line. It is here that another prepared turn is noticeable. Custom works only as long as it coincides with the interests of both parties. As soon as interests diverge, custom turns into soft clay into which the wheel sinks. The house changes the road surface. It introduces direct provisions on terms, measures, and routes into contracts, strengthens the rights of the mistress to manage part of the income in the absence of her husband in marriage records, and checks the calendar of church restrictions against the work schedule so that no unacceptable day becomes a penalty for deliveries. This does not embellish the paper, but it makes it uncompressible. The court does not like elastic wording. The court likes coincidences. And the more coincidences are sealed with wax, the less space there is for those who sell volume instead of evidence. Meanwhile, the city market continues to count. The correspondence contains lines that are rarely found in poetry. The cost of a courier's overnight stay, the price of a belt for livestock, the rise in the price of wax due to last year's crop failures. The recognition of these unimpressive expenses has a paradoxical effect. Creditors see a house that does not hide its weaknesses and therefore risks less. The carrier returns the fare to its previous level, the shop agrees to an installment plan, and the intermediaries set a date for the next meeting again. In this cold light, honor finally ceases to be a pose and returns to the place where it is accepted for payment. Predictability. And it is precisely predictability that turns out to be the only form of tenderness that survives the winter. Another subtle but harsh scene is the inspection of the chests. The keys are laid out, each with a tag. Copies are distributed so that 2 different adult women from different lines can present them independently. This ensures against human fatigue and bad days. If one gets sick or leaves, the other will bring the necessary bundle to the table. In the house book, places where the lines diverged are marked with a bold dot, and the correction is written next to it with the date and name. Such minor, almost artisanal perfectionism wards off great misfortune. Where outsiders wanted to see shame or licentiousness, there remains only a neat, boring victory over error. This victory will never become a song, but it will return to the house the percentage that they tried to steal from it with hurtful whispers. The court, having received another batch of papers, moves toward a compromise. It does not grumble about morality, it weighs the odds. One claim is reduced because the item is valued higher than usual without the consent of both parties. Another is stretched out over a season so that the house does not collapse in the middle of field work. The third is awarded a fine for slander without a public scene so that the market can see. A word in the square will have to be paid for with a sack of grain. No one applauds, but the shop stops taking extra interest. The cart driver does not demand an advance, and the parish door once again accepts short, dry statements instead of verbose excuses. And this is the most important victory, to bring the conversation back from the theater to where it has measure, time, and seal. By evening, the house is back to its usual geometry. Sand is brushed off the dried lines, the ribbons with seals cool down, and the bundles are put away in chests. The adults who spent the day among parchment and whispers do not look like winners, but they have lived through another cycle of predictability. Intimacy remains where its power lies, in the distribution of responsibilities and protection, not in the eyes of strangers. Honor remains where it can be presented in exchange for a higher interest rate. The dowry remains where each item is named and confirmed by witnesses. Ahead lies the fourth knot. The story will come to an end, where compromise will not be a happy ending, but a reliable foundation for the next winter. But first, the house will resolve a couple more old knots. It will check the measure of the jug, clarify the line of the ditch, and deliver the promised fabric. This is how the working day ends, in a world where love is the art of calling things by their names and putting them in the right box. The night chill creeps into the house unnoticed, through a crack in the window, but everyone is busy not with it, but with checking for compliance. Each piece of fabric is labeled with a handwritten tag indicating its length. Each jug is accompanied by a measurer's statement, linking its volume to the guild standard, and each promise is accompanied by the name of a witness linked to the parish. These painstaking coincidences are necessary not for the sake of order as such, but for the sake of predictability, on which credit, transportation, and the work season depend. It is in this dry geometry that the last weak spot is revealed. How a rumor associated with the honor of an adult woman in the house is instantly more valuable than any beautiful words. An unfortunate joke at the guild gate or an unsigned piece of paper is enough for the driver to ask for an advance payment again, the shop to look back at previous failures, and the mediator to pretend that he did not receive the messenger. But now, the house acts faster than the rumor. A short, confirmed entry about the marriage contract and the widow's share is made in the parish book. Copies are sent to the chancellor and the guild hall, and a trusted person carries a chest with descriptions of previous conscientious calculations to the elders of the guild. This is not a request for mercy, but a demonstration of risk management. Dates in words, seals of real wax, 2 witnesses from different lines. Rumor gets stuck in this cold sand, like a wheel in shallow pebbles. The rustle dies away, because it has nothing to cling to. Meanwhile, the judicial knot is drawn to a conclusion. The neighboring line brings its emotionally charged complaint to the office. That's how we did it. But the clash is not with rhetoric, but with the binding. 3 bundles are laid on the table, where each item promised in the dowry is confirmed by measure, origin, and witnesses, and each postponement of payment is covered by recognized travel expenses. The court sees not the right and the wrong in the eyes of the public, but a map of risks that the house has managed to name and connect. Where custom was spreading, the contract holds fast and firm. Compromise in such conditions is inevitable and sober. One claim is reduced to actual damage, the second is stretched out until harvest time, and the third, for slanderous leaflets, is punished with words so that the market understands the price of publicity. No triumph, no shame, just predictability restored. In the evening, the keys are put back in their places, copies are put away in boxes, and sand is shaken off the dried lines. The house did not become richer in things, but stronger in bonds. Honor is once again accepted as payment for a history of coincidences. Intimacy remains within the routine of work and protection, and love in the ability to send a messenger on time and not confuse the measure of the barrel. The morning after the decision is as quiet as snow on an unlocked chest lid. Business continues without fanfare. The shop returns to its previous rates. The driver does not demand an advance payment. The mediator sets a date for a new meeting on the neighborly dispute over the ditch, now without leaflets or hints. Adult women go about the house with the same rhythm as during the most anxious week. They check copies, update reservations in case of illness or travel, and arrange witnesses in lines so as not to depend on one person. This discipline does not look like heroism, but it is what keeps the family together. The difficult winter is not over yet, but now every weak spot is marked with a word and a date. Every obligation is either fulfilled or postponed with an acknowledgement of the costs. Every item of the dowry has a label comparable to an expense line. This is the final scene without fanfare. In the office, the compromise is recorded. In the parish book, there is a short entry. In the guild hall, there is an extract by which the market recognizes metal behind the gilding. Rumor loses its margin. Custom retreats to where it belongs, into the circle of private decency, unrelated to the price of salt and the work of the cart driver. The house lives on, not because it turned out to be more beautiful or louder, but because it managed to translate the most fragile things, bed, honor, hope, into a language that the shop, the road, and the court understand. In this language, there is no romance, no duels, but there is the only thing that survives the winter: predictability as a form of care, reciprocity as a form of strength, paper as a form of memory. And when a new bundle is placed on the table, all ready for other marriage negotiations, or for the quiet division of a boundary strip, the wax will be the same, the ink will be the same, the sand will be just as dry, the myth will remain in the square, and life will remain in a chest with copies.